Sonic, the heart of your system.
What's up everybody, my name's Andy and welcome to Kit Guru. So today we're looking at two mice from PATRIOT and their VIPER gaming range, and these fall into the intermediate category, and in the UK currently they're retailing for about $34.99. So before we go into too much detail in the comparison here, let's do the obvious comparison. So the V550 is an ambidextrous mouse, and the V551 is a dedicated right-handed mouse. So let's have a look at the aesthetics. So straight away, they are both made from the same sort of molded plastic shells, and luckily, well, in my opinion at least, they're not fingerprint magnets because they've got a matte finish, which I think is a really nice touch. They don't really sort of overdo the gaming aspect that a lot of other brands do at this price point. So I think possibly other brands are trying to target the younger audience by putting excessive etching and designs on their sort of lower end, sort of mid-range products. However, PATRIOT and VIPER Gaming here haven't done that, which I'm thankful for. They are very sort of stylistic and modern looking, which in my opinion, you know, is a plus point there. They both have RGB accents. So you'll see there is a slight difference as well. The V550 has sort of two small bars of RGB on either side, whereas the V551 has sort of an encompassing RGB strip that goes all the way around the sort of the bottom there. Size and design wise, the V550 is 3.8 centimeters tall, 6.7 wide, and 12.5 long, whereas the 551 is a little bit bigger, and that's because it's molded to that right hand shape, and it's at 4.2 centimeters tall, 7 centimeters wide, and again 12 centimeters long. However, I would say when they're actually side by side, the V551 is definitely longer. So I think they've got their measurements out a little bit there, but you know, they're pretty much the same. There's only a small difference. So the 550 being an ambidextrous mouse is definitely going to be symmetrical because it wants to suit to either hand, it's a nice touch, to be honest. It's a nice looking mouse and it feels quite nice. Whereas the 551, it's got a sort of sloping down to the lower sort of right hand side to fit that right hand a little bit more snug there, which is again a nice touch. I think it's really nice of PATRIOT to think about the consumers for once, you know, and make a dedicated ambidextrous mouse, because there's not a lot of dedicated left-hand mice, but ambidextrous, you know, fits to that need and purpose. And it's nice that they also made the dedicated right-handed, because there is more right-handed people out there. So smaller hand sizes would probably suit the 550 best, in my opinion, because it is slightly smaller. You saw in the dimensions there. And for myself, I've got sort of small to medium sized hands anyway, and they're both pretty comfortable to me, but it does depend on your grip styles. So larger hands probably will find them a little bit on the small side, especially the 550, but again, that does depend on grip styles, which we'll look at now. So the 550 I found sort of worked best for fingertip grip, and that's due to the sort of the thinner center in the middle there, but mainly as well because it's got two rubber grips on either side, so on the left and the right, and because it gets thinner in the center there, you can get a nice sort of purchase on it with your thumb finger and your ring finger. And it feels very suited. Even for me as a right-handed person, the 550 is really nice there. Claw grip works well, but you know, I found it as a little bit sort of narrow with my hands. Any bigger size than sort of small, medium hands would probably struggle a little bit with that. And palm grip was really uncomfortable because it left my sort of ring finger and little finger dragging around on the desk or the mouse mat there. With the 551, it was slightly different. So I found fingertip grip to work pretty well if you get sort of all your fingers on there, but I didn't find it worked as well as the 550 because there's no sort of secondary side rubber panel there. It's just a sort of slippery plastic bit there, and I found that my fingers sort of slipped off as opposed to the 550 where you get some really good grip with those double sort of rubber sides. Now claw grip probably works the best on this one, to be honest, because you can rest your palm on the back, get your fingers all the way around that sort of wider base for the right-handed design. And palm grip again left me sort of desiring a wider grip again, or even sort of an extended side panel to get your fingers right on there, because again, I found my fingers dragging along the on the surface there, which is kind of frustrating, but keep that in mind. So depending on your grip preferences, that's probably something you need to pay attention to. So button layout, the 550 offers 9 buttons and 8 of them are programmable via the VIPER software. A little bit different on the 551 because there's less. So you've got 8 buttons on this one and 7 are programmable. Now, luckily both mice use Omron switches. They're tried and tested, everyone's sort of a big fan of those, and they're rated at 10 million clicks, and they give off a really satisfying click on each of those, and they do feel very tactile. I'm a big fan myself. With the V551 on the button front, you get easier access. Because I'm right-handed and it's a right-handed mouse, you've sort of got a small one on the left-hand side of the left click, and then you've got the 2 on the left-hand side. So default for those is forward and back on web pages. And you've also got a dedicated M button and also a dedicated DPI button. The M button is to switch between profiles. Now with the 550, the only difference is there's no sort of side corner button on the left-hand click, that's gone, but instead you've got both sort of dual buttons on either side. Now, as a right-handed person, I kind of found myself accidentally clicking these if I was using claw grip, I'd probably say. When I was sort of going to pick the mouse up, I'd accidentally click them on the opposite side, so something to keep in mind there as well. But all the buttons have a nice, satisfying click, and I was pretty surprised for the price point they're at, that how nice all these buttons felt, to be honest. They weren't sort of spongy feeling at all. So scroll wheels are different between these, and this sort of surprised me a little bit. So with the 551, it is larger and more prominent, and it's got a bit more resistance to it as well. So I was quite surprised to see that, whereas on the 550, it's a little bit smaller, and it's a bit more recessed as well. And the same goes for the profile button that's marked with an M. On the 551, it is actually slightly larger and protrudes that a little bit more, whereas on the 550, it's a little bit more recessed. So again, something to take note on there. I would say the 550 again is a bit better for larger hands. So with the 550, we'll look at the DPI settings. So this one is rated at 5000 on the top end, default. So once you plug it in, it's going to be 5000 max. However, if you download the VIPER software, then you can extend that to 10,000, which is a nice touch. Now there is a difference with the 551, which again surprised me. This one's default is 6200 DPI, and after software you can reach up to 12,000. And I'll go a little bit more into detail later on that one. So the default settings are 800 DPI, 1600, 2400 and 3200, and there are 2 small lights on either side of these mice to indicate which DPI setting you've got. So sort of like the first one is no light, the next one is 1 light, the other one is the other light, and the next one is both lights. Now on the 551, you've only got it on the left hand side, whereas on the 550, being an ambidextrous mouse, they've thankfully included it on either side, which was definitely nice. Now when you change the profile, the M button that changes the profile also changes the color of the VIPER logo, which is RGB, which is, you know, situated on the lower sort of back where your palm rests. Now that will change color depending on the profile you have selected, which again, you can change the profile settings in the software later. Now, cord-wise, we're not dealing with rubber cords here, so none of that stickiness that sometimes you find. We've got some really nice braided cables here, and they're at a length of 1.8 meters on both. I would say, however, that they are fairly stiff out of the box. You can sort of give them a bit of a jiggle and loosen them up a little bit, but my 550 here is still sort of kinked So keep that in mind. I mean, personally, I like braided cables because of an aesthetic choice, but I know some people find that they catch on the edge of desks and things like that. So it's something to be aware of. Again, this is subjective. When we look at the underneath of these mice, again, they're very, very similar, but they are slightly different. So there's a nice honeycomb aesthetic design that's there. This does nothing for performance whatsoever. It's just to give a nice touch, so it's not just blank there. Now on the ambidextrous 550, you've actually got a symmetrical pattern there, which is very nice to sort of touch. And around the sensor, you've got a sort of large honeycomb shape there as well. Whereas on the 551, you've just got a random sort of pattern there and no sort of enlarged design around the sensor. So both of these have glide pads made out of polytetrafluoroethylene. Now that's a word for you. And it's also known as PTFE, and it's essentially the same as Teflon, but Teflon's a trademarked name, so it is slightly different, but it's essentially the same stuff. Now it is slightly different on both of these. On the 550, you've got 5 sort of mini PTFE pads, whereas on the 551, you've got 4, but the one near the front of the mouse is much larger. One downside I would say is you don't get any spares of these in the box, so keep that in mind as well. Weight wise, I think we mentioned this earlier, they weigh in at 166 grams. So for me personally, they are sort of on the sort of heavier side of mice. They're not the super lightweight ones. So if you are a fan of super lightweight mice, then these might not be for you. For me, they're sort of medium weight. I personally have had mice in the past that have been heavier, but you can't upgrade these. So you can't change the weight, add or remove. There's nothing like that. It's a completely sealed base there. Build quality wise, so build quality, they are, as I mentioned, made out of solid plastic, which is really nice. They're very rugged. There's no flex whatsoever. The rubber grips are recessed, which is quite nice. I would say there is a little bit of issues if I go a bit more critical into the build quality. So let's start with the V550 and the scroll wheel. So the scroll wheel is actually slightly loose. If you tap it from right to left, it sort of jiggles, and if you shake it hard enough, you can sort of hear it rattle a little bit. But I would say the 550 is very, very solid and there's not much rattle at all. The same thing goes with the 550 again. We've got some slight sort of overcut rubber side pads there, so it might like annoy you a little bit, but to be honest, it's not overly a problem. So with the 551, this one rattles a lot. So there's no flex going on, but it rattles a lot, and that's mainly because of that small extra button that you've got on the left of the left click. So if you sort of hold that still, then the mouse scroll wheel does sort of rattle a little bit as well, so it is more rattly than the 550. So there is a couple of extra things that kind of bugged me on the 551, and that was there's where the mold of the left and right click is, there is like a sort of small indent that comes back towards about halfway across the mouse. On the 551 there is a lip, so you can physically see and feel sort of a raised edge there, and that can get a little bit annoying. Whereas on the 550, it's super smooth, really nice on the palm, so you won't notice it there. However, I must say that this could possibly be due to our review models. So depending on the batch or SKU, you might not have the same issue, but be aware because they might be there. For the price point, I think these are really well made. So I know I've gone a little bit critical there, but for £35 in the UK, they are made very well. And I would expect them to take a good few drops off the side of a desk without breaking anything, to be perfectly honest, because they do feel very solid. And there's not sort of separate sections that are going to be falling off or anything like that. Try not to drop your mice. Both are ergonomic and comfortable, depending on your grip styles, as we mentioned earlier, so keep that in mind. So sensor-wise, this is where there is a difference, and this is why the DPI settings are different between each other. They both use PixArt sensors, and they are optical. So the 550 uses a 3325 sensor, and the 551 uses the advanced 3327 sensor. And I'd say this is probably going to be your deciding factor on which mouse you choose here. For the average user, it's probably not that much of a difference, but for a budget gamer that's trying to keep within that budget, I'd say this is definitely a point worth considering. Now with the V550, the IPS, so inches per second, is 100, whereas with the V551, the IPS is actually 220, which is an over 100% increase on the 550. Now this means that the 551 has a greater max speed of travel before the sensor loses its ability to track where the mouse is. Now, paired with the fact that they both have a polling rate of 1000 Hertz, it means that the 551 is going to take the advantage for more accurate, fast-paced FPS games. So keep that in mind for sure. So software-wise, we're going to take a look here at the VIPER gaming software, and this is a free download that you can find on the website. If you just Google the mouse of your choice, you'll find the link there. So I'm viewing this at 1440p. So at this resolution, it's fine. It's a nice size, but at 4K, I wouldn't be able to tell you if it would be too small or not, because unfortunately I can't test it at 4K. But at 1440p, it's absolutely fine. It's nice and sharp. There's no sort of pixelated parts on this at all. It's easy to navigate and responds quick. It opens very fast. And one thing that I think some people sort of leave out is resources. So it's got very little draw on the computer. So my computer is taking 0.1% CPU usage and 5 megabytes of memory to run this app constantly, which I think is pretty good, to be honest. I've seen worse. So in this software, you can remap keys, macros, DPI, polling rate, snapping, and overlay DPI. Now the overlay DPI is just literally a little feature that when you change DPI settings on the mouse, it'll actually pop up in the corner of your screen to show which DPI setting you've got, which I really like. But you can turn this off because you can see, you can sort of feel anyway, can't you? Now, one of my favorite things about this software, and thank you PATRIOT and VIPER Gaming for doing this, is that they disabled acceleration by default, which is brilliant because in my opinion, acceleration is the bane of any PC gamer's life because acceleration means that you're not as accurate as you actually think you are, because it's going to accelerate depending on how quick you're moving. Whereas when you've got it off, it's where you move your mouse is where you move your mouse. It doesn't overthrow it, you know? So I was very happy to see that you could turn this off. One thing to note, polling rate is set to 500 Hertz by default. So you might want to go here and increase that for depending on the game that you're using. Now, RGB wise, this is the same software, but it's a separate section hidden in the corner. To me, I must say straight away, it leaves much to be desired. I'd say there's minimal options here. The only settings you have is 2 wave options, 2 random options, and 1 customization option. So with the custom option, it is extremely limited and you're just stuck with breathe or static. So you can set each LED, but low vibrancy here. So I just definitely say that leaving it on the breathe setting works best. You can disable the LEDs, but this is very long-winded as you have to manually go and set each LED to a black color. There's no on or off switch just for the mouse. You actually have to manually go and do that, which is frustrating. And it could have been a very simple fix. The VIPER logo is unable to turn off because you're set to your profile, so that's one thing that you can't do. And another downside is the fact that there's no brightness setting. So as I said, the LEDs individually are quite sort of low brightness, but there's no brightness setting at all. It's either on or off, depending on if you manually set it. So conclusion wise on the software, it's overall easy to use, but it is very basic. The RGB lets it down, but for the price point, I think it's pretty good. You do have to sort of weigh these things up when you're looking at a budget sort of gaming item, and I think it does the job, but it just could have been a bit better. So now we're going to sort of conclude this sort of little review and head-to-head that we're doing here between Viper Gaming's intermediate mice. The pros of these are definitely that they are affordable, they're stylish, modern designs, they've got great switches and sensors. There is lots of customization when you look at the macros and button mapping and stuff. They are very ergonomic, but the cons sort of are on the same par, so the build quality could be very slightly better. The RGB software leaves lots to be desired. Certain grip styles are not suited to each mouse. And the 550 uses a lower quality sensor, but it comes in at the same price. So the question you've been all waiting for is, well, which one should you choose? Well, to be honest, they're both great mice. So have a look at the points that I've said about, so grip choices and things like that, and sort of go with that. I mean, it depends on the aesthetic as well, what you like, but personally I would only go for the 551 because it's got the better advanced sensor by PixArt. So because of fast-paced FPS games and stuff like that, you've got more option and range with the IPS and polling rate options. But I must say, I do find fingertip style grip on the 550 more comfortable, and that's generally how I sort of use my mice. So I prefer the 550, but the 551 is the choice I'd go with. But either way, for £35, I think it's a great choice. So if you're trying to decide between these mice today, well, I hope I've helped you, and any comments, please leave them down below. If you're a techie like us and you've just got an interest in it, then stick around because there's lots of content coming your way. Make sure you hit the bell, hit the subscribe, and stick around for more. I've been Andy, this is Kit Guru, and we'll see you next time.